Well, hello and welcome back, everybody. This week's conversation, well, one-sided conversation, is about chapters 31 and 32, and starting Division 5, Cultural Context. I believe I mentioned in the past that culture is not a tactile thing. You can't go to the store and get a gallon of culture. And as we go through life, different experiences that we have create our own personal culture, different layers. If you were raised in like a small Georgia town and never left, you'd have a different cultural perspective than a person raised in Atlanta. Additionally, depending upon what part of Atlanta you were raised in, there'd be a different cultural perspective from that point. You know what your family's like, your friends are like, the religion that you practice, the schools that you go to, all those build and create your cultural perspective. Now, think about people raised in different parts of the world. How many cultural perspectives exist? There's some stuff that we can group together, but in general, there's a whole lot of difference. A friend of mine calls herself a third culture kid because her family is from Mississippi. Her parents raised her in the Middle East. They're teachers over there. And she returned to the States, and so she's instead of the Middle East culture that she was raised in, she has the United States culture that she's dealing with. So she was raised with the cultural perspective of parents from the South, learned as she grew about the Middle East culture, cultural practices, and now experiences a different set of cultural rules in New England. I have cousins that were raised in a little bitty Alabama town where they were very go to church 3 or 4 times a week, very conservative, I guess you would say. And she figured out that she was gay, and her family disowned her, wouldn't talk to her. They didn't know because that's wrong. Well, when I met her, when I saw her and met her partner, I gave her partner a big hug. The partner was kind of freaking out because her family was like, "No, you're poison. Stay away." And I mean, I've been all over the world. I've been exposed to many different cultural influences, and I'm not as closed-minded as some people are. Now, I'm not saying that I'm right and they're wrong. I'm just saying, as far as cultural perspectives goes, I have a broader um, latitude of acceptance that we talked about in that other theory and about persuasion. So I mean, think about it. If you're raised in a little bitty town in your whole life, you know a total of about 75, 100 people. Whereas if you grow up in a town where you know 1,000 people, you're going to have different influences. So it's the same with communication. You would communicate differently with your close friends than you do a stranger. You communicate differently with your close friends than you do your classmates, than with your parents and your teacher. So our communication is created as we grow. Our communication skill set is created as we grow. And the Gender-like Styles, chapter 31, basically says that there's a excuse me, cultural difference between men and women. And because of that cultural difference between men and women, we communicate differently. Now, they did make reference to the book Men Are from Mars and Women Are from Venus. And You can look at that if you want to. Some people say it's great, some people say it's not so hot. I really don't have a positive or negative to say about it. I mean, I read it in conjunction with a couple of classes that I've taken. But I do agree that we, in many ways, have our own cultural dialects. And that's not to say that all men talk the same and all women talk the same. It's a generality, which I really hate. But in these particular situations, you have to draw some generalities because, as I mentioned earlier, the vast number of cultural perspectives, uh, you can't group all men together. You can't group all women together. You can't group all men under 20 together because an 18-year-old raised in an urban setting would be different than an 18-year-old raised in a rural setting. An 18-year-old male raised in a Catholic church would be different than an 18-year-old male raised in the Jewish faith or in the Muslim faith. So, but even in these different subsets, men and women talk differently. So, what they're saying is genderlect is the masculine or feminine style of communicating in their distinct cultural dialects. So, where did they come up with all this stuff? Well, according to the authors, women desire connection, regardless of which cultural scenario you were raised in general. They're saying women want connection. They want connection with people. You know, a lot of girls, and I don't think I'm, you know, being rude by saying girls, but a lot of women have women friends from childhood, or they're very close to their women friends. Many men don't have that same bond with a close male friend. We got friends, but we're not as close. Men desire status, according to the textbook. So women want to connect, and men want to be in charge. We want status. We want people to look up to us. Women focus on rapport, R-A-P-P-O-R-T, rapport, and which is conversations seeking to establish a connection. Men concentrate or focus on report, R-E-P-O-R-T, which is a monologue style. Men getting attention, information, winning. Men are like, these are the facts. This is it. And my wife and I've been married 40 years, and when we first got together, I would just the basics. This is it. I mean, that was the way the Army did it too. So not only was it ingrained in the male aspect of my youth and everything else, but as it was the Army way. You know, why spend 20 minutes when you can say 2 seconds? So men just get to the point, and women want to know why. Women talk more in private. When there's a couple of women together, they have conversations. Men, you can have 5 men in a room watching sports or something. Don't say a word to each other the whole time, except good play or something like that. But or men can go fishing, be with each other all day on a boat, and not say 5 words to one another. We just don't talk in general. And once again, these are generalities. So there are men that do talk. There are women that do talk in or don't talk to other ladies. So you have to understand that any type of theory this is done, they have to use generalizations for something like this. Men like to talk more in public, vying for attention. And this was brought up when I was taking a couples comm class about men and women in a classroom. And guys raise their hand, answer questions. They say things. They want to get in there. They want the world to look at them. Men often will tell jokes or stories, and more often than not, the stories are about themselves, making themselves look like heroes. And women tend to tell stories about other people. And once again, that's not saying all men or all women. Cooperative overlap is a supportive interruption. So if I'm telling my wife or somebody something, go, yeah, I understand. Yeah, I know. That's a cooperative overlap. It's a supportive interruption. Whereas I have been told that, and when I interrupt, I'll be changing the subject. And yes, my wife told me that. Men tend to ask less questions. It shows weakness, is their theory on it. And I mean, if you think about it, there's the old joke that men will never ask for directions because they don't want to act like they don't know. Whether, and that joke may have been based in some truth, but I always read a map and figured out where I was going, and then you can't even find a map anymore. Everything's on your phone. Men tend to be more comfortable with conflict because boys are raised in a way that we're always competing against one another. Sports and track and all this other stuff. When you go hunting, you have to have the biggest deer, and you have to have the nicest car. And so men are more comfortable with conflict than women are. And when it comes to making up nonverbal communication, portion of this was talking about, women would like to talk after an argument. They want to talk and settle things down and then maybe get intimate, according to the book. And men, on the other hand, they want to get intimate and then maybe talk about it because that's how they want to settle stuff with the intimacy. And women is like, no, I can't be intimate as long as I'm still mad at you. So they're coming from different perspectives. A speech community is a group that's sharing an understanding of communication goals and a way to enact them. So, men have a speech community, women have a speech community. Each family kind of has its own. Um, but can we get past this? Can we learn to communicate? And the author says, yes, we can. And to do that, men need to take sensitivity training so they can be more understanding and want to connect more. And women need to take assertiveness training. My only problem with that comment is, unfortunately, in our society, and you women out there can tell me if I'm wrong, but when a man is assertive, he's assertive, he's take charge, he's a leader. And when a woman is assertive, more often than not, she's a bitch. And it comes from both sides, but mostly to men. It's like, no, 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 no. And they have this hard time sometimes not thinking about the feminine, da 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 da. But if you take assertiveness training, I want you to, I want to caution you that some people are not going to think you're assertive. They're just going to think you're being bossy. And that's their problem, not yours. The aha factor. Excuse me. The moment that a person realizes the other's argument may be valid. It's not something that's scientifically written in stone, and this is when you're going to find it. It's when you have an open mind and you're talking to somebody, and you realize, wow, they could be right. And it could be an open mind about something as trivial as the way to get from point A to point B, or a food, or unfortunately, it seldom happens with politics. But the aha factor, it seems like politics were so entrenched in our position that we will not allow the aha factor to come in. And unless you have an open mind when you're having these conversations or watching the news or reading an article or reading, some news, something, you'll never have the aha factor. As long as you keep shutting it out, you won't have it. So that is chapter 31. Chapter 32 is the standpoint theory. It is by far my favorite theory. And it's kind of difficult to comprehend fully until you get used to it for a while. But my first inkling that I liked it and what I thought it was I see the world differently because I am a white male raised in middle class America to a soldier father. I had a mother, both my parents were there the whole time. I saw the world a certain way. I'm supposed to hold the door for women. I'm supposed to pick up the check. That's what my dad did. That's what a man does. Um, when I was taking a communication class, they told us to find a theory and evaluate our life. And I used the standpoint theory. And I looked at my life. And then I had to present it, and I presented it like when I ran up Pikes Peak. When I started, there was a whole bunch of people around me in kindergarten and first grade and second grade, and you had all these friends around, and you were learning from them and learning from your teachers. And as I went further up in school, my friends' circle kind of tightened up. I didn't have as many people around me. And I went to college, and then I joined the Army, and then I got married. So I had less and less people affecting me, but I was learning from them. And that was all my way up the mountain. And when I got up to the top of Pikes Peak, I turned around and looked, and the road was winding all the way up Pikes Peak. But I saw my life by looking back into it. I'd never done that before. There's more to standpoint than that, because technically it's achieved through critical reflection on power relations and their consequences that oppose the status quo. So to be truly standpoint, you have to be willing to look at something and oppose the status quo if you're willing to fight for it. You're willing to say, no, this isn't right. But to begin to understand standpoint, I understood that I saw things because of the way I was raised and who raised me and where I was from. I was from Georgia and Texas, not Wisconsin or Wyoming or Colorado. So the basics of it is you see the world the way you do because of the life that you have had to this point. I spent last week in Washington, D.C., and I love cigars. And a friend of mine, one of my wives from 40 years ago in the Army, lives up there, and she picked me up one day, and I was just finished my cigar. And she said, well, you're not going to bring that thing in my car. And I was like, okay. A lot of people don't like it, don't bother me. But when she was young, little girl, her father and his drunk friends would hold her down, tickle her, and blow cigar smoke in her face. And she can't stand it. So it's nothing that I would have ever expected. I just thought she didn't like cigar smoke, but she explained it to me. So we have a completely different standpoint, if you will, on cigar smoke. I enjoy it. I like the way it smells. I like it. She can't stand it. But true standpoint theory is that you're willing to take it to the mat. You're willing to look at the world not according to what your culture says, but the bare bones. This is what's actually happening. The feminist standpoint is what Julia Woods wrote a lot about. And she brought that in from a philosopher named Hegel. And I actually used Hegel's statement in my dissertation. And Hegel said that we don't view the world the same. Slavery is viewed differently depending upon which end of the whip you're on. So back in the centuries ago, in the day when slavery was the thing, which don't get me wrong, it never should have been, and I'm glad it isn't now. But the slave owners, so no, this is how God tells us we're supposed to live, and this is what we're supposed to do. We are superior, so it's okay. And the slaves were like, I didn't ask to be here. I didn't, I'd like good pay. I'd like a roof under my head. I'd like to be able to keep my children, but they had no say so. So anything we look at in the world, in most cases, can be looked at from two different sides. Women are marginalized, a marginalized group. In most every society today, women are marginalized. They are second class citizens in many countries. They still have no rights in many countries. Many countries they can't work, or they have to have a man with them, or they have to have a veil over their face. They can't wear what they want to wear. During Desert Storm, technically it was illegal for a woman to drive a vehicle because it was against the law on that land. But we had women fighter pilots flying over it. So, but women are a marginalized group. And that's where Harding and Julie Wood bring this from is, okay, you all heard of history, right? History is what happened yesterday and the year before and 100 years ago, da da da. Have you heard of her story? Instead of History, Herstory. What is her story? What is the perspective of the women in that era about life? They weren't the ones that were literate that could write. They weren't the ones that made the rules. They didn't make the laws. So everything we have is from a masculine or male patriarchal point of view. Up until this time, we now have women in charge of things and women making rules and women making laws, but they are still marginalized. Local knowledge is from a time and a place and experience and relative power as opposed to knowledge from nowhere. That is supposedly value free, the truth from nowhere. What that means is the patriarchal hierarchy, according to the feminist standpoint theory, has said this is the way it is. And it's like, but why? Because it's the way it is. But why? Because that's the way we always done it. But why? Because that's the way it is. Where do those rules come from? But local knowledge is no, this is the way it is for me working. I was in the Army for 20 years and men and women got paid the same thing. So for a while I didn't quite get it, you know, but then I started looking at the world a little more closely. And when a man and woman have the same qualifications, they're hired for the same thing, and he makes more money than she does, why? Well, back in the day, it's because the man had to support his family and women didn't. Most women that were working were not married and they didn't have a family they had to support. And so they didn't need as much money. That's really not right. So, local knowledge, how ask this person, I'm blind. And one of the organizations I work with is their motto basically is for us and by us. They don't want non-visually impaired people making decisions for visually impaired people because non-visually impaired people don't know where we're coming from. Because most of them think like I did before I was told I was blind. To me, blindness was darkness. Well, it's not. I can see some. but that's all I can see. So, instead of saying, well, you can't do that, you're blind, because we don't want you to say that, ask us what we can do. Strong objectivity, research from the marginalized point of view. When I did my dissertation, I interviewed 13 couples who were sighted when they got together, now one's blind. And I want to know how their communication skill set changed so they could stay together. Because a lot of people get disabled and get divorced. The vows say better or richer or poor, sickness and health, better or worse. A lot of people don't really understand what that means when they say the vows because sometimes people get disabled and it's like, I can't handle this. I'm getting a divorce. Now, I'm not saying it's the able person's fault. There are many people that get disabled, like I am, that would say, okay, you have to wait on me hand and foot because I can't do anything because I didn't deserve this. But, and then the sighted partner says, look, I didn't sign up for you to be a burden and be a baby. When you could do this, you can cut your own food up, you can cook your own food. Yeah, you gotta learn how to do it, but you can do it. So they might leave on that aspect. And the other aspect, they just might not be able to handle it. I can't handle driving this person around all the time. I can't handle, because I'll go clean the dishes and clean the table. My wife generally goes behind my back and does it and acts like, it's no big deal because I missed something. But there's some that's just, no, I can't handle that crap. So, strong objectivity, research from the marginalized point of view. Research based on women's lives. That's what feminist standpoint is. Research based on women's lives. And once again, all women do not see the world the same. A rich white woman has a different perspective or standpoint than a poor black woman does. A mother has a different perspective than a woman who's never had a child. A mid-range, wage person has a hourly worker has a different perspective than a corporate person. So, black feminist thought. Now, this was another one of the researchers that delved a lot into this, and what she said was there were basically four things that you had to look at. The lived experience as a criterion for meaning. We've lived it. We've done it. We know what we went through. So we can tell you our story. The book references a movie called The Help. And there were some complaints in that because a white woman wrote the book. And it was about three African American or a group of African American maids that in the time where they weren't slaves anymore, but they were basically housekeepers, and we still had a lot of prejudice and things like that. And they said, well, she really can't write this book from their perspective. The actresses that played the part said, no, she did a damn good job. But the use of dialogue in assessing the claims. You've got to be able to talk the talk. If you're saying this and this and this and this, and you can't support it with your dialogue, then something isn't right. The ethic of caring. The black feminist thought is that because you care and you worry about and I've got a black son and he's going to be facing this and this is how I feel. So your emotions and how you care is tied into all this. And the ethic of personal accountability. You can't just say, well, this is the way it is, and not take any accountability for things that you may or may not have done to make it that way or to change it. So that is the standpoint theory. Like I said, it's my favorite, and I try to look at life through a lens of standpoint, not not how I see the world, but if I'm talking to somebody, how do they see the world? What is their experience? Excuse me. What is the coming back to this blind thing, I don't know other people's blindness. I have some friends that are totally blind and I don't understand that. But when I talk to them, I try to see it from their perspective. I try to understand it from their perspective. I have many old veteran friends that went through Desert Storm in Iraq and Afghanistan. I didn't. I don't know what they went through. But when I talk to them, I don't try to tell them my story. I try to find out what their story is. And that's, to me, that's why standpoint theory is so wonderful because it forces you to look at somebody else's position. I hope things are going good for you. Email me if you need me. And if you do email me, I will get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you and have a wonderful week.